Hey everybody, VMiss here, and I just wanted to take some time to talk about some VMware basics and then some VMware ransomware basics. Now, I do a lot of research around the different VMware ransomware variants out there, and I see a lot of things out there that aren't quite accurate. And I really think that's important that everybody has an understanding of some VMware fundamentals so they could really understand the full threat of VMware ransomware and what it actually does. So let's take a look at this diagram. We have 3 VMware hosts, and they are in a VMware cluster, right? The VMware clustering is what allows for features like high availability. So if host 1 died, then the VMs on host 1 would start on host 2 and 3. And DRS, which is basically load balancing. So if host 1 got overloaded, vSphere would move things to host 2 and 3. Now, there's 2 really important features for these things to work, or VMware clustering to work in general. That's shared networking, which I don't have in this diagram, but shared storage. So that means each and every host is connected to each and every data store in the cluster. And the data store is where the VMs live, right? So a VM is nothing more than a collection of files on a piece of storage. It's something really important to remember. So there's all these files that make up your virtual machine, and it's on a piece of storage that each host can see. I'll bet there's a tiny light bulb going off right now if you've not been exposed to VMware before, because each host sees all the storage, right? So let's say I am a malicious actor and I gain access to host 1. I now have access to data stores 1, 2, and 3 in every single virtual machine there. So if I want to do something bad in the environment, it's very easy for me to take out that whole cluster just by getting access to one host. Now, there's a lot of different ways that threat actors can get access to your vSphere environment, which I'm not going to go into. But I do want to say that each ESX host has a command line, right? The ESXi shell. And through this command line, you can issue a bunch of different commands, right? So there's all sorts of ESXi CFG commands where you can go do some advanced configuration, stuff like that. But you can also execute Linux commands because BusyBox is on these hosts to let us do things like change directories and just kind of basic administration, right? Linux-based administration to these hosts so we can manage them easier. Which is why Linux-based ransomware can target ESXi. It's not because ESXi is a form of Linux. I saw something out there that read like there's Linux-based VMware and Windows-based VMware, and that's not the case. VMware is its own operating system with its own kernel, but BusyBox is what allows those Linux commands to be issued on the ESXi host. And that's why the Linux-based ransomware can basically wreak havoc on vSphere. So if I'm an attacker and I get command line access to a host, which has SSH, right? Because I said there's like kind of this Linux management layer. So if I manage to SSH into a host somehow because I've gotten to an administrator's desktop or what have you, I now have access to all those data stores and I can start doing things to that environment. I can start encrypting things and all sorts of nasty stuff, right? So the thing is, we really want to make sure that we're restricting access to ESXi because we don't want people to even be able to do that, right? It takes one administrator doing one silly thing to basically hand over the keys to the kingdom. In our next video, we're going to go over some of VMware's ransomware resources, especially their kind of hardening guide to help us understand, okay, if we're security minded or if we're not quite security minded yet, how do we protect our vSphere environment? So quick recap, how VMware ransomware works. An attacker gets access to an ESXi host, and from there, they have access to all the different data stores. Because of that, they can encrypt those virtual machines because those virtual machines are just files on a data store. Now, is there more to it than that? Absolutely, but those are the very, very basics of how VMware ransomware works. And I'm going to put some really interesting links for you to take a look at in the comments, a more detailed write-up about how VMware ransomware works, as well as some really interesting research I've done on different VMware ransomware strains. Stay tuned for more because we're going to really be diving deep on the VMware ransomware threat.